It's not.
Goes on live television
Sheikh
every
Rais
day.
is not my sheikh.
No, he's a madkhali.
He's not.
He said even if
There's
he
no
goes
such
on
a Kumar
television
Khalid.
every day and commits zina, probably with his sister, Allahu Alam with who.
Whose sister?
He said Rice.
Who's sister talking about? No. Who's sister talking about?
Rice said every day you
No,
go.
who's sister talking about?
Any sister, any of our sisters.
He's a clown, this guy, man.
No, Shamsi, come back, don't run. Don't run.
Come on, let's go, this guy. This guy is a liar. Have respect when you speak to people. You think about people's sister.
Shamsi, not your sister.
No, forget about my sister. Why are you talking about people's sisters?
Well, that's what Rice said. If the Hakim does zina with someone's sister, you obey the Hakim. You live with him.
He lives with him. Hey, this is the Hakim.
He has to define unconditional worship of the Muslims. So why is not even if he's an oppressor. You know that. That's whatever he does. He rapes the wife as well. That's objective. No, that's objective. But that's real. Okay, we'll do the condition after. Not your wife. Logic. If the madkhali says, if the leader violates your wife,
Why did Aisha write like the breastfeeding adults? Breastfeeding adults! And you know what? You can get it like that, right? I'm just coming to you. They're happy and they're not causing any harm. Fine. So then why bring it up? I agree with you, and I'm thankful that most of them don't take it to real.
Excuse me.
That don't follow it to the word.
All it's doing, all it does.
But I'm saying,
conversation from that angle. It's just all about creating division. When you go to somebody and you say, your God, your God is a bad person, they're against you, and that's what we need less of.
I understand that. And their ethos and their whole thing, the attitude, right? So you're gonna go there, right? That is the ethos, that is the thing, you're in that, okay, you may be a good Muslim, you may be a good person. There is, and I know, and I've met him, I've got friends that I would die for that are Muslims. I would literally, if I saw him in a fight, I'd die for them. But we're talking about his religion, and man, very boring. And there's things that are written that they can't go about.
Yeah, but my thing, I gotta go, but listen, the deal for me is, I think we need less, my thing, I wasn't coming from that. I came here thinking that we need less tribalism, which means that we need to be pointing out people's faults less, and we need to look for commonalities more.
But that's not as humans. It's not going to happen. Well,
ما حد راضي عليه.
He doesn't want to debate, he runs away. No, last time, by the way, he recorded the debate, he never published it. Because he couldn't stand. Imam Malik believes in the revolution. Imam Hanifa believes in revolution. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said, go against me by force, by the sword if you want. What's the proof that they believe in Quran? Just because I don't memorize it today.
I think this one is a live stream. Just waiting for the crew to get their speaking gear ready. We're ready to roll. Ready? 1, 2. Are we ready? Yeah, go. All right. So guys, what I would like to talk about is what happened in France with regards to Notre Dame, the cathedral that was burnt to the ground, and why the media was so quick to dismiss that this was vandalism, that this was an act of vandalism. So quick that even whilst the flames were burning, Akuma, the microphone will have to face me to pick up the voice, that even whilst the flames were still burning, they said that it was an accident, that it was caused by the renovation works. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that it was an act of vandalism. What I am questioning is why the lamestream media was so quick to assume that it wasn't. And the reason why I want to talk about that is because of a non-reported story about what is happening in France. In 2018, the French Ministry of the Interior, which is responsible for security and protecting the rights of French citizens, listed the number of anti-Muslim attacks as 100, a new all-time low in France since 2010. Anti-Semitic attacks were numbered as growing to 183 attacks. That is an increase of 358 attacks since 2010, year on year. The number of anti-Christian attacks increased, listen to this number, to 1,063. 1,063. That's the French government's own numbers of anti-Christian attacks. 875 churches were vandalized. 129 churches were robbed. 59 cemeteries were vandalized. And yet, the British media talk about the rise of Islamophobia in France and the alt-right. But they don't talk about the rise of Christophobia in France. Silence, nothing to say. When the number of attacks against Christians is much higher. Statistically, every day, at least 2 churches are vandalized in France. 80% of violence that is aimed against someone because of their belief, according to the French government, is committed against Christians. And yet, the liberal media never talk about the rise of anti-Christian prejudice in France. The start of 2019 shows a big rise in anti-Christian acts. Examples from this year: Saint-Sulpice church in Paris, firebombed by someone unknown. Sainte Hélène de la Voix Cathedral in Turn, firebombed, started by a 17-year-old whilst the church was being restored. Notre Dame of Children in Nimes, the tabernacle was destroyed. The hosts were chucked onto the floor. The cross was drawn on the outer wall in human excrement. Saint Nicholas in Huelles, vandalized 3 times in 10 days. The 19th century statue of Our Lady Mary was shattered. Christ on the cross was thrown to the floor. The Basilica of Saint Denis, whose organ was 200 years old, was destroyed. The stained glass windows shattered. It's a 13th century church with the burial site of 66 French kings and 81 princesses and princes. Notre Dame of Good Hope in Dijon, the consecrated host was scattered over the floor. The mass books were torn up. This February, in Ines Madani, a 22-year-old Muslim was condemned to 8 years of prison for trying to blow up the Notre Dame in 2016. When the French Interior Ministry was asked about the proportion of degradations by groups, the ministry refused to give the details, saying all religious buildings must be respected. The government's response for National Plan to fight against racism and anti-Semitism was deployed by the state in March 2018, but the French media and the British media demonstrate gross indifference to anti-Christian prejudice in France, despite the fact that statistically it is the highest form of prejudice in France. The British media, like Channel 4 News, talks about the dangers of Islamophobia and the alt-right in France, ignoring the fact that by far the greatest level of persecution is directed against Christians. Why? Why the double standards? Why? Why the ignorance? Many of you standing here today who are listening on recorded video probably never even heard about what I've just talked about. The reason why the liberal media will not talk about the persecution of Christians in France is because they don't want you to stand up for Christians. They don't want you to have a sense of solidarity with Christians. But as Christians who follow the teachings of the apostles and the prophets, we have no choice. Christians are called to stand in solidarity with one another, because as Christians, we are one body in Christ. We are one family. We are part of the same bride. We are one church, one holy nation. And so, when our brothers and sisters are being persecuted anywhere in the world, it is the concern of Christians everywhere